Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Singapore International Cyber Week 2024. My name is Wayne Chan, and it's my pleasure to be your host on this afternoon. Now, we have an exciting lineup of international panelists here with us today to share their perspectives on the theme Insights into 2024's Cyber Threats. Now, I'd like to encourage our audiences to pose questions for our panelists through Slido by scanning the QR code as shown on the screen. Now, as cyber threats evolve to be more sophisticated and prevalent, understanding the current trends, tactics, and strategies employed by threat actors is crucial for businesses, government agencies, and individuals. Now, today, we'll be hearing insights into the current cyber threat landscape and engage with a panel of leaders and cybersecurity professionals as they delve into the latest developments in cyber threats. Our panelists will also be sharing their insights and experience on the current threat landscape and even insights to future trends. And now, without further ado, to share his views on insights into 2024's cyber threats, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Recorded Future, Dr. Christopher Ahlberg.
Good, very good. Welcome everybody. As said, I'm Christopher Ahlberg. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Recorded Future. We're going to talk about threats. We're going to mostly talk about threats in the Southeast Asia region. Pretty much all the data I'm going to cover is from 2024. Think about that as the sort of the time scope of the time frames. And with that, let us dive in. So, as said, I'm the CEO of Recorded Future. Won't get into much of the detail here, but we believe we're the largest intelligence company in the world. There's 1,000 of us who do nothing but intelligence, most of that in the world of cyber, some 2,000 clients around the world. And sort of you should think about what I'm talking about today in the context of us running a quite global intelligence collection and production system that goes 24/7. Used by some 15,000 analysts and so on around the world. I'll start off by saying, I had our research team. They're called INSICT. It's about 100 people. They do nothing but writing about cyber threats all day. They use our platform, and so I asked them to put together originally the sort of the slides here, and we worked together over the last, say, month to do that. And they came back and they said, yes, the summary is that threat actors are exploiting Southeast Asia's rapid digital expansion for economic and geopolitical gain. And I'm like, guys, you know, that's a little bit dull, isn't it? But so, you know, we'll sort of dive in that. And I was sort of poking at them over the last month to where can we get more specific, and is that really enough? So I'll say that I think the first of all, you've got to look beyond the Southeast Asia region. So I took the pleasure here to put sort of on a map here, Singapore, the little green dot down here, and it looks nice, doesn't it? Sort of away from the conflicts of the world. We obviously are in a world where there is a war in Europe. That's new, and over the last couple of years. And what's, to me, the thing that really stands out about that is the number of parties involved, even if it's a war in more or less a single place. At the same time, we have now a conflict in the Middle East that has gone from sort of a local brewing, sort of whatever you want to call it, a long-term conflict, into a major conflict involving many different parties that is sort of on the cusp to going to something quite more nasty. We have more closer to where we are a conflict between North and South Korea that has sort of been on ice for a long time. And then finally, obviously, what's going on in the Taiwan Strait. And I think the takeaway for me, looking at the broader context before we dive into the cyber side of things, is this sort of the complexity of all this. The number of parties involved, just seeing now that what we learned over the last couple of days, that North Korean soldiers may soon deploy in in Ukraine. To me, that is astounding. If anybody in the room would have told me a year ago or 2 years ago that North Korean soldiers would deploy in Europe in hot war, I'd be like, what are you making up? And I think we live now in a time when things are happening, and they're happening at a pace where things are sort of getting a little bit unnerving. So I wanted to sort of keep that in mind. When we think about threats at Recorded Future, we like to think about them in terms of convergence, threat convergence between cyber and geopolitical/war and disinformation. We see these sort of things in that convergence. That sort of, we did this little graphical figure that I have up here. We put that down maybe 5-6 years ago the first time, and we believe this is sort of a good framework for understanding the conflicts of today. Number two then, as I think about what we're going to talk about Chinese APTs, we're going to talk about disinformation, we're going to talk about cybercrime, we're going to talk about a little bit of the geopolitical context of as it relates to hacktivism, and then I'll wrap up with a little bit of AI very quickly on that side, but it feels like you sort of have to have a little bit of that. So we'll start with just looking at the region here. So we collect global net flow. With Recorded Future, we believe we have one of the largest collection capabilities in the world for that. That allows us to look for incidents that involves command and control nodes as taking part of data exfiltration from targets, or as in traffic controlling these command and control nodes. And so with that, we've been able to track 21 Chinese actors, 21 groups that have been targeting the ASEAN or the sort of Southeast Asia region here over the last year, all within 24. And we add that up to about 10,000 incidents. You should think about the word incident here as involving data exfiltration from these targets. In total, we believe we've seen 2,500 unique victims in this. And it's sort of, you have to think about this sort of coming from a pretty unique visibility here, when we can see this outside in with just looking at the network. We don't have to be on the network where we actually see the data being exfiltrated from. We see this from across a set of groups here. This is a little bit of the Recorded Future naming nomenclature. We call the Chinese actors that we track: Red Delta, Red Echo, Red Gulf, and so on. The other thing that has stood out through this year is now you saw the ISOON leaks that came out of China, when we learned a lot about the details about how these groups are interconnected. And we could then see that a lot of the shared tool sets between these groups, and also allowed us both in terms of understanding who these groups are, but through the general quartermaster that is sort of divvying out the tools to these Chinese groups, and allowed us for even using our network visibility here in an even better way. So that's sort of number one. Number two, we also think that we've sort of seen here over the last couple of years a shift in the Chinese activity, going from using pretty brute force sort of methods to more of a low and slow sort of approach, as they've been targeting harder targets, and we're going to talk about that, more critical infrastructure targets, and wanted to stay more quiet. So we've been seeing an increased use of 0 days and targeting internet-facing devices, whereas historically we'd seen China going after more of end-user software of various sort of sorts, now shifting towards going after internet-facing devices. And you may ask yourself, why is that? Why go after these sort of devices? And there's probably 2-3 reasons. A, if you get into them, they're sort of a good conduit to get into a network, pretty obvious. Number two, they many times lack the sort of logging that needed. Maybe there's no EDR on them and the like. And number three, if you get onto these devices, a lot of data flows in and out of them, which allows you to, A, to hide in that traffic, and number two, you can gain a lot of intelligence from them. So keep that in mind, and then along with the word here of pre-positioning. So we believe we've been seeing over the last 3 to 4 years a trend here of China pre-positioning in critical infrastructure, originally in Asia and then spreading from there. So about 3.5 years ago, I guess, or so, many of you might remember, we published a report at Recorded Future about Red Echo targeting India, in targeting the power infrastructure. Red Echo is a group, we have not attributed that to a specific military and intelligence agency in China, but we're we firmly know that it's China, and we caught them in a whole set of power dispatch centers across India. What was interesting with this was that it was pretty clear that you're not going to spy on these power dispatch centers to learn about what's going on. Technically, these are old things from the 50s and 60s or what have you. There's not much to learn. You're doing this for a single reason, and it is for pre-positioning in a future conflict. This happened at the time of the physical sort of, I don't know what to call them, but fighting it out around the Pangong Lake area. It is also interesting in the sense that it was maybe one of the first time we saw this sort of activity from China. When we released this report, we received phone calls of very pointy nature from both people in the West as well as in Southeast Asia, and it sort of told me that we're onto something here. This is going to be very interesting. So then what we've seen here over time is sort of I'll call it an evolution. When we saw Red Echo from the beginning, they were using single provision computers to go after the targets. Shortly thereafter, we saw who we call Red Foxtrot. That's a PLA unit going after Pakistani infrastructure in a very similar way. But then a few months later, or maybe half a year later or so, we saw this group that we call them Tag 38, another Chinese group that came back at the Chinese or the Indian power infrastructure, and in this case, going after the same targets, but coming in via IP cameras in Taiwan and South Korea. It's a very interesting thing when they started to try to hide in these IP devices as a way to, and I remember a briefing we did with somebody a very smart person involved in all of this in India, and the guy says, look, I don't know much about anything, but I do know one thing. If my power infrastructure is talking to cameras in Taiwan and South Korea, that's bad news. And I'm like, you're right, that's bad news. Now, from there on, it's been super interesting to now observe that these IP cameras, now the Chinese have gone and built whole anonymization networks based on either provisioned or non-provisioned equipment. So you can see the sort of the graphic here with the set of networks that we track, these anonymization networks. There's been an approach here that China wants to hide their traffic, which makes perfect sense. If you want to stay, as I talked about earlier, you want to stay quiet, you want to stay low. And so then by building these anonymization networks, either again in provision networks where you set up machines, maybe typically in VPSs, virtual private services setups where you can build that, or you get yourself your hands on various sort of internet devices and where you sort of take advantage of backdoors, what have you, to log into those, and now you create these anonymization networks out of those. And we've seen then that's all the way up to where we saw with Salt Typhoon here most recently. So a very interesting timeline where you can sort of see both the evolution in the TTPs over time. You see the evolution of starting in Asia, but eventually coming to the US. And I think we can continue to sort of think about Southeast Asia being sort of an exploration ground or a playground for these guys to learn more about how to do their attacks. All right, so switching gears a little bit. So we also have been observing here over the last year disinformation campaigns or influence operations campaigns, maybe it's the right word, by China in the Southeast Asia region. The one that we've spent a lot of time on at Recorded Future, we call them Empire Dragon. They're related to the Minister of Public Security, and both in terms of sort of doing negative targeting, if you want, driving negative narratives into the region. One example here of using AI-generated content that might be interesting, but also driving positive messaging for the Chinese, for PRC. So it's this interesting combining this sort of critical infrastructure pre-positioning with these sort of disinformation campaigns, and seeing the two going on at the same time might tell you something about things to come. All right, so now I'm going to switch over to talk a little bit about cybercrime. So just like we were using network intelligence before, this is now from the Recorded Future network intelligence, but looking at crimeware or criminal activity. So we can likewise here see and this is now typically run by either it's Russian cyber criminals or to some degree Chinese cyber criminals as well, but I would say mostly Russian. And we can look at the trend year over year. This is up significantly, and we can see that obviously in sort of dollar values as well, both from Recorded Future sources and other sources, where we can sort of see that not only do we see this in network traffic and increase in cybercrime, but also in the dollars from it. We can look at what we think about as data theft here. We're looking at the number of databases that are being for sale in dark web forums or in Telegram channels and so on. So we track that as well, and we can see a trend here up to the right, which obviously drives online impact, where these actors can do bad things with this data. A lot of this data ends up being used for initial access sales or various sort of scam activities. We see it also that it can have an offline impact where, you know, human trafficking near-like activities end up being, you know, getting people to work in these scam call centers. We also have been observing here recently over 24 some more sophisticated methods than just the sort of the selling of the databases. One example to call out here is this Pakistani Tiger 113, a cybercrime group that we track in Pakistan, where, you know, I think it's called Tycoon, particular, call it a kit for manipulating MFA. So the sort of more sophisticated methods that are being used here than the traditionally quite blunt method. So pretty interesting to observe. The ransomware ecosystem around the world continues to be a very successful way of monetizing things. We've been spending a lot of time on that at Recorded Future. We look at the sort of the credentials that underlying all of this, because when the ransomware gangs get in, they use these sort of the stolen credentials as a way to get in there. So we track very carefully the initial access brokers. I think we have some 50 billion credentials in total. It's sort of a somewhat crazy number. But then we can look at that and look at the portion of that comes from the SCA, Southeast Asia region, clearly again up until the right. And we can also look at the dump sites where these guys publish about their targets and look at the targets that come out of the Southeast Asia region, and again, up until the right. And maybe that's interesting because historically most of the targeting has been in the US, UK, Canada, where they're sort of the easiest language sort of pieces to be for these guys to go after, but that seems to be slowly changing here. All right, so a few comments about hacktivism. I will sort of, first of all, I always like to make the point that sometimes when I go out and meet people in Southeast Asia region, they're like, tell me about the hacktivism we see between Malaysia and Indonesia and between this and that. And I'm like, look, you should worry about China. You should not worry about local hacktivism. It's sort of the number one point that sometimes people, not very popular comment, but I'll make it anyway. But then number two, we are seeing here an impact of the map that I was showing at the beginning, where, you know, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, we saw local hacktivism activity here that could be tied back to Ukraine, but even more so, no surprise, I think, in the Middle East, driving hacktivism activity here in the Southeast Asia region. And one of the reasons why this obviously stands out is because of these DDoS as a service tool sets that now exist, where pretty much, not pretty much anybody, but I don't know, maybe it's fair to say, maybe not my mom, but, you know, pretty much anybody can get their hands on the ability to do relatively sophisticated DDoS services. And that drives some activity here that is pretty interesting. And I think, you know, it's going to be interesting. We're going to see more of this. I like to sort of sometimes joke about Recorded Future and say that 3 years ago, or no, sorry, probably 4 years ago, we wrote a report where we were like, nah, hacktivism is sort of done and over. But I think we were wrong, and hacktivism is here to live, and we should watch out for it. And then finally, a couple of comments about Gen AI or generative AI. Clearly, actually I want this slide here. Clearly that has sort of changed the threat landscape in some pretty interesting sort of ways. There's some stuff that is already going on. The obvious stuff is in doing phishing campaigns. where the sort of the easiest part, number two easiest part is in disinformation. So we've been tracking this threat actor that we call him Copycop, a Russian threat actor that has been pretty damn effective in being to be able to very quickly turn sort of content into interesting disinformation approaches. And we've also been seeing deepfakes and various sort of activities and so on. What I think is more interesting is about where this is going, where this might go, and we don't have the time to get into all the details, but we've seen examples. I think this was from University of Illinois, showing how LLMs were able to automate the exploitation of sort of one-day vulnerabilities, maybe not 0 days, but one-day vulnerabilities. Very interesting experiment from, I think, a company called Hyas on this iSpy, an LLM-driven malware that can self-repair its code as it's sort of trying to get its way through a system. Some of our own researchers at a hackathon recently built a piece that would take physical maps, either from YouTube videos or online videos, and try to create attack plans out of just being able to look at the actual physical maps of OT systems and the like. I think, generally we're not there yet over on the right, but it's coming, and we should all be very careful about it. I try to not be panicky about AI, but we should all be aware about where this is going. All right, so to wrap up, again, I think it's important. We might be in that nice little green corner of Singapore where things are nice and easy and clean, but the world is complex around us. A lot of interesting things can happen. I always tell people, think not just about cyber, think about cyber, geopolitical, war, unfortunately, in these days, together with disinformation. That is the big learnings. We have a big deployment in Ukraine. I spend a lot of time over there. The big learning there is this sort of the convergence of these three different factors in one. And a series of activities here from various sort of domains. I do think that it's China that stands out, but at the same time, we're seeing some examples of how cybercrime might be coming to the region from ways where it hadn't done before. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher Ahlberg, for your insightful sharing. And of course, I'd like to invite you, take your seat in the front row just before we invite our panelists on stage. And now, let me share with you some background about the Singapore International Cyber Week. Organized by the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, the Singapore International Cyber Week is Asia-Pacific's most established cybersecurity event. Now, CSA is Singapore's national authority for cybersecurity and plays a pivotal role in Singapore's smart nation and digital economy ambitions. The 8th edition of the SICW is now taking place from 15th to 17th October 2024 at Sands Expo and Convention Center. Under the theme of trust and security in the digital era, SICW 2024 will explore the impact of digital developments on the global multilateral order and how security can be developed to enable trust in the digital and cyberspace. Now, the event will bring together global policy makers, industry leaders, and top academia from across the world to exchange best practices and strengthen international cooperation on topics ranging from harnessing digital opportunities and tackling cyber challenges, the evolution of cyberspace and cybersecurity policy, the implementation of cyber norms, as well as security in the Internet of Things and operational technology space. And now, on that note, let us invite our panelists for this afternoon. First of all, we have Eva Chen, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder Trend Micro, and she'll be joined by Emmanuel Naëgelen, Deputy Director General of ANSSI France. We also have Maria Adebahr, Cyber Ambassador, Federal Foreign Office, Germany, and also Quint Simon, Head of Public Policy, Asia Pacific and Japan, Amazon Web Services. And we're joined by Anand Raghavan, Vice President of Engineering AI Cisco Security. And of course, our moderator for this afternoon is Garrettson Blight, Vice President and Managing Director for Global Government Market, Booz Allen Hamilton. And without further ado, Garrettson, over to you.
Thank you. Let's grab a seat. So I have good news for everyone. You've picked the absolute best panel that you will come across today, by necessity, because this is the first one after lunch. And if you don't believe me, I challenge you to find another slide like Christopher showed you with the world on fire. So you had a great context setup. Really appreciate that, Christopher. And we'll discuss a lot of the topics that he teed up for us today. So I think that many of us know year over year we're making progress in cybersecurity, but I would challenge that notion with what we've come across so far in the keynotes and what we've heard, that the techniques that adversaries are using are constantly changing. And while we see the stability in some of the tried and true demonstrable techniques such as ransomware, such as cloud credential stealing, as well as the DDoS attacks that Christopher mentioned, we also see new rise in techniques such as generative AI and using that for nefarious purposes, or in the Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon sorts of approaches to compromise critical infrastructure and have pre-positioning against multiple nations across the world. So with that, I'm going to pose a question to the diverse panel that we have here from both countries and industry. And I'd like each of them to take a few moments to maybe comment on what's the most surprising or compelling threat that you've encountered this year.
Starting from this
yes,
side?
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
Well, Trend Micro is a cybersecurity company, a pure play cybersecurity company. And we are the longest standing pure play cybersecurity company. We've been doing this for 35 years and do nothing but cybersecurity. So with all that, 35 years in cybersecurity, nothing else but cybersecurity, nothing surprised me anymore in the threat landscape. But I must say, actually, this year, what I see the biggest change in the threat landscape is before the threats, starting from the outbreak, is one size fits all. When Melissa virus or those I love you virus or the WannaCry, that's one threat and hits everybody. It's the same threat, right? And later on, like Chris mentioned about APT, it's very targeted. It takes a lot of technique to target a certain target. But then with Gen AI, it breaks this. It can be very targeted and scalable. Using Gen AI, they can design very targeted attacks, but they can design them in millions in 1 day. That's the most scary landscape that I see.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Emmanuel Naëgelen, the Deputy Director of ANSSI, the French cybersecurity agency. And turning to your question, what was probably the most surprising, of course, in the context of the Olympics, was that we were expecting a tsunami in terms of cyber attacks and incidents. But ultimately, we only had to face a couple of small waves. And I could tell you this was due to good fortune, but I would rather believe that this is due to a very long-term and very consistent efforts we made before the Olympics, and I will expand on that subject after.
Great, thank you. Adebahr?
Hey, I have been asked to use this mic. I don't know why. Probably because I'm the only diplomat on the panel, speaking for the German federal government. I think what we really see is the convergence of a still really high cyber threat environment and landscape. We see more hybrid, that's a word that I didn't hear so far, more hybrid attacks, also in the context of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And we see an increase of state-sponsored cyber attacks, but in convergence by using private entities. So this mix of things and different routes and strands, I think is new, probably also as a trend in 2024.
Thank you. Ms. Simon.
So my team, we lead the work on public policy, and in that context, we spend most of our time speaking to government officials about how to think about cybersecurity policy. And I would think about that being a constellation of things: privacy laws, cybersecurity policies, critical infrastructure policies, AI policies. And I think maybe threat is slightly too strong of a word, but one of the things that I think we're most concerned about is fragmentation and lack of harmonization across cybersecurity policies, especially among like-minded countries. It's been actually quite interesting with the advent of AI. I think there's actually been a really great focus from many countries on ensuring that regulations and approaches to AI are as harmonized as possible. We've seen efforts through the G7, through the OECD. And I think from our perspective, we could see more of that, more of those efforts to try to drive harmonization in cybersecurity policies and approaches to critical infrastructure as well. And I think that would be a great area for us to collaborate on together.
Thank you. Mr. Raghavan.
Yeah, so I'm at Cisco, so we in security see threats across the whole landscape. And like Recorded Future, we also have the Talos Research Organization, where we get to see a lot of the attacks and analyze them as well. A few things that have been interesting to us, and I'll separate into two categories, like Christopher mentioned. I will touch upon Gen AI because that looks like the flavor right now. But in more traditional attacks, some of the things we are seeing is, one is because of the widening of the attack surface, you could have multiple low priority alerts that come across multiple different attack surfaces. And if you just look at those point products and try to analyze them, you may ignore them. So that's one challenge, right? And that's driving up platformization of the security stack across organizations, right? So that's one thing, and that necessitates the use of classical AI to correlate and derive high priority intel from these low priority alerts. The second thing we are seeing is, specifically when you look at things like ransomware, things like email security, these are very much here to stay. If you look at cyber insurance claims, you look at any report, FBI, any of the reports, they are still the number one, number two cyber insurance claims, right? And what is happening is they're moving from the simpler attacks to the more complex language-based attacks that need language-based approaches to go solve for. So invoice fraud and other kinds of threats that are language-based are becoming more norm in the private industry rather than just simple phishing attacks, right? So that's another thing that's happening, that the old attacks are still there, just refashioned into using newer techniques. And as part of that, attack as a service, just downloading packages that anybody can run, is another trend that we see as well. So the volume of attacks is going up. The ease with which these attacks can happen is going up. If you look at the time between when a vulnerability is disclosed and when a first attack happens of that, it's shrinking from weeks to days to soon it's going to be in the hours. So the importance of patching your infrastructure soon after a vulnerability is disclosed becoming ever more important, right? So all of those problems exist in the traditional cyber world. When you move to the AI and the Gen AI world, I think it is quite frightening, but we are all still grappling with how do we describe this, right? Most organizations want to enable their employees to start using Gen AI models and connect that into their environments. Very often, they don't understand the threats involved in connecting into their production databases or databases with customer information, or giving it access to their infrastructure that they realize later on. So AI safety, AI security is becoming more important than ever before. And there is going to be a whole new wave of attacks that Christopher's kind of alluding to towards the end that's going to become increasingly important to guard against, because we are still kind of grappling with even how big that attack surface is. So that's another thing that I think is happening.
I'll ask you a little bit later about how we actually protect all those things, so keep that in mind. But Deputy Director, SICW is primarily a great way within the region for many countries to come together and to talk about some of these challenges, to have both diplomatic and technical discussions. And a parallel to that, I think, is the Olympics. It's a unification. It's a beacon for hope for all these countries to come together. And your role was to protect that and make sure that that was going to be successful. Clearly, there were physical attacks that others might be aware of, from the news, but I'd love to hear more from your perspective if we can pull the thread on the Olympics and understand more about what ANSSI has done.
Yes. So, yes, few words concerning the Paris Olympics. We, as I said before, we had not that tsunami we were waiting for. We recorded 448 cybersecurity incidents, but only 83 real incidents. What I call real incident, it's a successful cyber attack, the very beginning attack. And no incident has an impact on the games. Government entities, sports, transportation, and telecommunication were the most targeted sectors. And we think that, as I said before, the major reason for this achievement resided in the long-term efforts placed beforehand by the French authorities and operators to enhance our preparedness and well ahead of the games. So we were entrusted as ANSSI by the Prime Minister to lead and to coordinate all cybersecurity initiatives prior to and during the games. But the constraints were very, very heavy. Just to give you a few examples, we had to engage with over 500 entities, and many were unknown to us, and many haven't heard of cybersecurity at all. For example, we had a lot of event agencies, which are in fact small businesses, and generally they are not concerned by cybersecurity. Time also was a very constraining factor. We wanted to postpone the games, but it was not possible. And as you know, the games lasted only 2 weeks. And as you maybe all know, within 2 weeks, it's not sufficient to remedy a cyber attack. So what we did is to really establish a huge network of coordination between different command and control centers. We had control and command center in Paris 2024, of course, but we had also command and control center in different ministers and in the police, of course. And we had to be sure that we were able to coordinate all these command and control centers. And one key point is the fact that ANSSI was the sole entry point for every report concerning cybersecurity. It was very important to be sure that we were able to have a comprehensive situation. We also distributed a lot of drill kits because it was impossible for us to train all these entities. So we decided to create a drill kit and to distribute it to all these entities. Just before you talk about the convergence between disinformation and cyber attack, for example. And we were very also aware of that and the fact that the games also represented a very good opportunity for cyber crime or activists to publicize their action. So we spent a lot of time to teach our political leaders, but also journalists, and just to be sure that they avoid media hype on very simple incidents, like DDoS, for example. And it was a very important part of the preparation we made. For example, you have this group, very well known, which is called the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn. And they claimed before the games that they wanted to attack the water sanitation system in France disrupt it during the swimming competition in the Seine. So of course we spend a lot of time to protect this sanitation system because it was important to be sure that this system was robust enough. But we also make sure that every fake claim by this group could be detected as a fake claim. So we teach once again the journalists and our leaders for that. And in this place, I also need to highlight the overwhelming support and cooperation received from international partners. The exchanges we had with international colleagues during the games were another proof that cybersecurity is eminently a team effort.
Thank you so much for. I'm sure there's many other things that we could. Yes, thank you. There's many other things I'm sure we could ask you about, and that could take its own entire section of the conference, I'm sure. If I could pivot from that, though, so that's fantastic and often, and quite motivating too, but often we will ramp up and focus on a particular event like the Olympics. But I'm going to pose the next question to Ambassador Adebahr to say, within Germany and from what you've seen, day-to-day operations, what does the threat landscape look like for your country?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What was the German government attributed this year, and I think this is fairly new because we have for a year now we have a national security strategy, and from that derives that if Germany sees something, it says something. So the policy of this federal government is to call out and to name incidents, grave incidents and attacks on our critical infrastructure when and if we see them in the political appropriate way. I'm a diplomat here. But I don't know whether you noticed in May this year, the German foreign minister attributed to APT-28 to the Russian security services an attack on the Social Democratic Party and on other critical infrastructures in Germany, really vocal. In August this year, we attributed to China a cyber attack on our federal agency for geodesy and cartography. This sounds very technical, but this is the agency which provides basically the federal German entities with maps and pictures from critical infrastructure and worldwide, and also for our military use. And in August this year, the German Foreign Office made public that we saw a big disinformation campaign conducted by Russia called the Doppelganger, and I have the figures here, aimed at destabilizing support for Ukraine and destabilizing the public democratic opinion in Germany, really focused. And we saw within 6 weeks 1.8 million posts on X and 50,000 fake accounts in Germany alone. And we made this public, and this is something that you saw from a German perspective in this year. And the last word, maybe I a little bit wanted to contradict you in terms of there's too little coordination and alignment in cyber policies. I think, yes, I mean, you can get better every day, and we should so. I see some European counterparts of mine here in the audience. Within the European Union, we try, and we really just imposed a new sanctions regime against Russia, which allows us also to target hybrid attacks. We have a cyber diplomatic toolbox and a hybrid toolbox. Not so often used so far, but I think the European Union is very much aware of the cyber threat landscape, and the attributions that we did this year were with solidarity from many counterparts in the EU and worldwide, and so this is also a group going more vocal besides OECD, besides G7, where you saw a lot of this year. And last word, the EU is first mover in terms of AI with the EU AI Act. This is a whole other discussion probably here, but yes, I leave it there.
And attributions are not taken lightly, so thank you for your efforts in trying to thwart those at the diplomatic level. So as we pivot slightly into some of the technology, I'll pose the next question to Ms. Simon. So in 2024, AWS released Mithra. I'd love to know a little bit more about either that tool and the intent to try to thwart adversaries as well as other AWS efforts along those lines.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think since this is a fairly technical audience, many folks are familiar with some of the customer-facing security services that AWS provides, whether that's GuardDuty, CloudTrail, AWS Macie. But I think one of the things that that is perhaps less well known and that we are spending more time talking about is all the work that we are doing on the back end, using the global scalability of the cloud, the scale of the cloud, in order to help customers protect their data. And Mithra is a really good example of this, of course, named after mythological sun. Mithra is our internal neural network graph model aimed at spotting malicious domain names. And it's huge, right? We're talking about 3.5 billion nodes and over 40 billion edges. And the reason that it's so large is because AWS, in a single AWS region, so for example, the region here in Singapore, we get about 200 trillion domain name service hits per day. And within that, per day, we've identified about 182,000 new malicious domain names daily, and that is what Mithra does. And there's a couple of other services, I think, in that space that I'd touch on. Sonaris. So Sonaris is something that we only started talking about in the last 3 or 4 months, but basically it's our, again, internal tool to analyze network traffic to identify and stop malicious attempts to scan and link to customer accounts. And again, the scale is really amazing. From May 2023 to April 2024, we found 24 billion attempts to scan S3 buckets, that's our simple storage solution, and 2.6 trillion efforts to attach or implement vulnerabilities in our EC2, so that's our compute virtualization. So again, global cloud scale. And then the last one I'd quickly touch on is MadPot. This is our globally distributed network of honeypot threat sensors that also has automated response capabilities. We are looking there at, again, about 100 million potential threats daily, of which about 500,000 are identified as potential malicious threats. And that, again, is through this honeypot capability. And then those insights, those security insights, feed into some of the external-facing services like Amazon GuardDuty. So again, it is that power of the cloud in terms of the scale, what we can see in the back end, and really more and more, these are things that we share with our customers and with the broader public that we're doing because we're very honored and privileged to host more critical infrastructure on the cloud, more public sector agencies on the cloud every day. So that's what we've been working on.
That scale is impressive. Thank you for all that you do. The next 2 questions, I'm going to pivot a little bit more towards emerging technology. So Ms. Chen, maybe I'll start with you about what Trend Micro has seen from emerging technology, AI, what adversaries have done with some of that, what you might be doing, and then I'll follow up so that you can elaborate a little bit more about your LLM attacks and things like that. So please, Ms. Chen.
Okay, I think for AI, you need to see it as a tool. And this tool has been used by the hackers, by the attackers, right? So I just mentioned that AI enabled the attacker to do very targeted but very scalable business model. The attacker has their own business model. I don't know, you probably all hear about deepfake, right? Just last quarter, there's a Hong Kong financial institution. They were attacked by deepfake. And the financial administrator actually, in a Zoom call, get an instruction from their executives to wire out $25 million US. And he did. If you think about this, you might say, well, this stupid administrator, financial administrator, why would he do it? If you understand what he was facing, it's not just one single executive, it was a group of executives in the room. Each one of them, the CFO, the CMO, the CEO, all sit there and say, we have this thing that we need to do, please do this. It ended up with all 3 of those executives are deepfaked. That's how scalable now today. They can do this like a group. And there's another type of like investor club in the line group, and you will find out people sitting in those groups and they feel like I'm one of these hundreds of people here and everybody is talking about how good this stock is. End up with when we find out what is this whole group, in the whole 100 people, only the victim himself is the real person. All the other 99 are faked, are all AI-generated conversation. That's how scalable AI could make their attack is. Now, we talk about AI, but AI technology is a great technology. I think a lot, probably most of the organization, government agency are all thinking about implementing an AI project, right? Because AI is so powerful because it breaks the data silo. Originally, inside a company, you have a lot of data silos, so the intelligence cannot be gathered together. For instance, your HR system has your HR data. Your finance system has your finance data. Your customer relationship, CRM system has CRM system, right? But when you use AI and you break all the data silo here, now you can come up with new solution of like, how can I increase the company's profit margin for 1%? It can either come from your HR or finance or customer services, right? But this powerful AI that break the data silo also break a fundamental security rules, which is so-called RBAC, role-based access control. When you control HR data, then you have your role in HR system, so you have certain access right. But when you break all of this, then I'm an engineer, simple engineer. I ask an HR question. The AI doesn't know that. So how are you going to reestablish the role-based access control when your AI break all the data silo? That is a big, I think, challenge that when you implement AI, you need to think about. And new technology, I think the best way to implement this is you need to implement another AI gateway that is supervising, that is also language aware, contextual aware, so that when someone posting a prompt to the AI say, how do I increase my profit margin for 1%? And the AI just answer by like, cut your CEO's salary or something. The AI gateway would understand that this exposed actual HR data, and therefore you should filter this response from the prompt. So you need to filter the prompt based on the role, and then the response from the AI need to be context filtered. So these are, I think, the new technology need to be implemented. Not only AI itself, the LLM need to protect itself, not to have hallucination and or this wrong answer, but also even more important, I believe the first step is look at your company's operation, understand how you put in your AI operation, and then match your new security, especially as data access control right, onto this new operation, using AI gateway as the new way to solve this problem.
So, Mr. Raghavan, gotta ask, AI versus AI. What do you think?
Yeah. So whenever there's new technology that comes into our lives as private citizens or as employees of organizations, I think if we are to look forward and see how can that new technology create new attack vectors, just have to see how are you using that new technology, and the ways you use it are the ways in which attackers are going to compromise you, right? So if you look at it from a behavioral economics perspective, we are all predictably irrational. So what are the ways in which we irrationally use that technology is a good indicator of how an attacker might compromise us, right? So what are some of the common use cases that are happening in organizations today with AI and Gen AI, right? Most of your organizations probably are asking your engineers to use products like Copilot to write code faster, right? Now, if you don't give access to a developer, instead of going to Stack Overflow, they might copy-paste code into ChatGPT and get a better written function back, which you may or may not know about. So shadow IT was a problem 10 years ago. Shadow AI is a problem today, right? So that's a new attack surface to think about. And bidirectional. I could copy code from the internet and put it into the source code repository too and corrupt my IP. So that's one use case, right? Another use case is companies using Gen AI to summarize things that are happening inside of their environments. And I'm using AI loosely, AI or automation. So I have all these logs coming from my firewall. I want to summarize that and tell me, hey, is there something bad that's going on? Now, as part of that, maybe I had a couple of engineers spin up a project very quickly, and they wrote up an algorithm, and that summarizes it to me. It's very important for me to consider the factuality of that, right? So hallucination and things like that, get a factuality score. More importantly, it's very important for me to consider where did this data come from? Because the attacker can just poison the data and then wait for me to come to the wrong conclusion because the data was poisoned, right? Or even worse, that data might have been used to train a model. And if I've poisoned the data source, now the model can behave in ways that are predictably open for me as an attacker to go compromise. Similarly, the other very common thing you're seeing is to enable employees to actually adopt Gen AI very quickly, companies are allowing them to download models, unverified models from Hugging Face and places like that, and start testing with it, running it on AWS SageMaker or other places, right? Now, the model file itself could be corrupted. In fact, there are so many stories of malware present in these model files. So in an attempt to enable our organizations to adopt Gen AI faster, we are forgetting that, okay, this is a net new attack surface, and we have to have the same kinds of controls in place to monitor and manage all of these new data that is coming into the organization. So you have to protect your build environments and your training environments, right? And then, of course, as Eva mentioned, runtime protection, right? So if I am an engineer that's building a cloud application, sticking with the HR example, and I launched it in the cloud, and a user asks a question, and then I give a response, and then the user asks, what is the data you trained this on? And it sends the HR spreadsheet back as a response to the user. Now that's your data leaking, right? So you need to have guardrails for protecting against data like that. You see some other examples where I put a wrapper around a publicly available model, and I claim that I have an AI assistant in my product right now. I might be an airline, and somebody asked for a refund, and the bot gave it. And now I'm legally responsible for actually honoring that. Or there was a story of one of the car companies selling a car for $1 using their chatbot, right? So what kind of guardrails do you put there from, again, a relevance perspective and make sure that it's a relevant question that your chatbot is supposed to answer, right? And the last category is just safety, right? Harmful questions, toxicity, abuse. You don't want to be in the news as an organization that you launched a chatbot and somebody asked it, how do I build a bomb? And you got a very detailed response back. You want to be able to protect against that, right? So these are all real concerns around Gen AI that you have to worry about. But more importantly, I think just in traditional AI, the way you can use it to protect against some of the threats that we still continue to see, which are not Gen AI related, is to actually really think about how can you use AI to correlate signals across multiple sources, right? So that if you have a place into which all of these alerts are coming in, that's not just a reporting tool that's reporting on the alerts to you, but you're either investing in products that actually correlate these alerts and give you insights, or you're building those yourself, and you're using AI for you to correlate across multiple low priority signals to give you valuable insights, right? The other important part of that is how you're combining signals that you're getting from your network in terms of access patterns, identity, and things like that, and combining that with signals that you're getting from your security portfolio, from your user logins for the MFA flooding, as you would have seen as a popular way to kind of disrupt people in the middle of the night and get a token validated. Or if you're looking at signals that are coming in from your firewall through encrypted traffic that you may not be able to decrypt and inspect, how are you actually protecting yourself from these signals that might be coming in as low priority, and then being able to escalate that into something that you need to take action upon right now. And the last thing I would say is that as employees of organizations, just like security awareness training is a box we got to check, but it's highly insufficient, there's got to be an AI awareness certification as well for everyone. I think that's going to be, unfortunately, an important part of our careers, or fortunately, depending upon how we want to learn about it, because there's going to be net new attack vectors that come in that it's very hard for us to comprehend how AI can be used in these ways to kind of manipulate us, not just deepfakes and video, even images. I mean, just when we are getting used to QR codes, I, as a policy, don't scan QR codes. When people tell me to scan a QR code, it's the best way to get you to go visit a malicious site, right? Just when you're getting used to things like that, now there's going to be malicious videos and malicious voice, and we really need to spend the time as people that care about security to actually educate our workforce around those and make sure that we have certification programs for them or awareness programs for them so they are prepared for these kinds of attacks.
So I think there's a lot to take away from that, and I want to take a few minutes that we have left to ask one more question that comes from the audience. But along those lines, we've talked about deepfakes, we've talked about potential challenges of AI, but also the promise of how it can help us. This past year specifically, we've seen WormGPT. You know, how can you spin up phishing emails so quickly, and things along those lines. We started the conversation with the keynote that talked about a lot of different threats from Christopher, who covered Recorded Future, and literally had icons of the world on fire, okay? My question to you that comes from the audience, and I'd like each of you to answer this in less than a minute if we can keep it to that, is are you optimistic on where we're going from a threat coverage perspective, or are you pessimistic? We've talked about the potential of AI for defense, but it's very clear based off your commentary that we don't quite know how to unlock that fully yet. We're still in the early stages. Similarly, so are the threats. And we've also talked about very practical examples, both from a cloud perspective and from events within specific nation states. What are the things that we're still dealing with today, let alone getting ahead on emerging technology? So very quickly for each of you, optimistic or pessimistic?
Optimistic. The reason is, before, preventing threats is very difficult because it's unpredictable. But with the power of AI, it's predictable. It's possible that you can map out what is your most important asset and what is the most likely attack path that the attacker will take against you. And therefore, you can allocate your resources to well protect your environment, your attack surface, much more efficiently. And that's why I would say I'm very optimistic. So don't think when we say we use AI to do cybersecurity is just because it's fashion. It's necessary, and it's really a breakthrough technology that can help cybersecurity to well predict the threats come from and can well better utilize your resources to protect your attack surface.
Thank you. Deputy Director?
Yes, of course I'm optimistic, because if I'm not optimistic, I think I will have to change. But more seriously, what we learned from the Olympics is that, as I said before, preparation works. Detection also. Detection works, and it's very efficient against cyber threat. And the last word, and which is not the least, of course, is that national but also international coordination and cooperation, it also works. It's also very valuable to tackle this new emerging threat.
Thank you. Adebahr?
Slightly optimistic, no. Optimistic in the overall picture, yeah, there's no choice. From a diplomatic perspective, it will be important, I think, to establish a government structure, an international law and government structure with principles governing our all use, good use of AI, fair, free, accessible, and indiscriminate. So these words are out there, everybody knows them already, and with the Global Digital Compact we have established an AI board with the United Nations. In the EU we have to implement the EU AI draft regulation. So there's a road to go, and we have to go it fast, I think. And this is the challenge, I think, from my side, from the government side.
Great, thank you. Simon.
Optimistic for two reasons. First is just the incredible amount of innovation that we are seeing our customers do with regards to new cybersecurity capabilities. I think several on stage, customers and partners, and how those capabilities are then offered to the public at large. So I think the innovation that our customers doing is exceptional. The second thing I would say is I think the model of how governments and the private sector and civil society are working together on cyber threats is improving year by year. I think we get better. It's cutting out. I will shout. I think it's getting better how we collaborate through forums like this, but all through dedicated kind of three-party discussions between government, civil society, and the private sector. We have found those to be really valuable tools to align the approach and to ensure that all good actors are moving in the same direction.
Thank you. And you have the last word, Mr. Raghavan.
I get the last word. I'm very optimistic. I think humanity's ability to do good with technology far outweighs humanity's ability to do harm. So I think the big change now is the rate of change of technological innovation has gone up, and the ability of our brains to process that and adapt to that is the challenge. So if there's one thing that I would say, we need to learn how to learn faster. To that end, I think the use of Gen AI for education is something that I'm very passionate about. A lot of information will be very easily accessible and available to us. So as professionals in our fields, we need to be able to stay on top of things, not every 5 years, every 5 months. That is the biggest thing I worry about. But otherwise, I'm super bullish about tech.
Excellent, thank you. Well, you heard it here first, lots of threats, lots of technologies, but everybody's optimistic. So please thank the panel. Great job, thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Your contributions have truly enriched our discussion and provided our audience with a deeper understanding of insights into 2024's cyber threats. We're genuinely thankful for your time, dedication, and the wealth of knowledge you have shared with us. And of course, to our audience, thank you for your active participation and thoughtful questions as well. We hope that today's discussion has been informative and inspiring for you. Now, do note that this session will be available on demand on the SICW website, so feel free to revisit this session at your convenience. Our next HLP AI session is titled, Can AI Be Secure?, beginning at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you and have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.